There are stories in the Bible that stir our hearts. There are others that shake us, and then there are stories that stop us in our tracks. This is one of them. It's not about giants falling or seas parting. It's about a man who tried to do what seemed right, who reached out his hand to steady something sacred, and was struck down by the very holiness he tried to protect. This is the story of Uzzah, a story often misunderstood, a story rarely told in full, but behind the judgment is a revelation. Behind the silence, a thunderous truth. God is holy, utterly, completely, dangerously holy. And when His presence comes close, we are invited to rejoice, but we are also commanded to reverence. What happens when joy outruns obedience? What happens when worship forgets the weight of glory? This is not just the story of a man who died beside the ark. It is the story of a king, a nation, and the fire of a God who will not be carried by human convenience. Come closer, but take off your shoes. The valley was quiet that morning, a sacred hush woven into the fabric of the hills outside Jerusalem. A faint breeze stirred the olive trees, rustling their leaves like whispers from the past. In the heart of this solemn peace stood a king, young, radiant, cloaked in humility and crowned in the promise of divine favor. David, the shepherd boy who had slain giants, now ruled over a united Israel. Yet his heart remained unsettled. He stood alone, overlooking the city he loved. Jerusalem, the city of David, basked in the rising sun. But the king's thoughts were not on power, conquest, or peace treaties. His mind burned with one holy desire. The Ark of God must come home. For years, the Ark of the Covenant, crafted in the wilderness where the presence of the Almighty rested between golden cherubim, had been far from the heart of the nation. It had once brought Israel victory. It had once brought plagues to enemies. But now it sat almost forgotten, tucked away in the house of a man named Abinadab, far from the pulse of the people. David's soul ached with this disconnection. The throne had been restored. The people had united. But the glory of Israel, the Ark, remained absent from Jerusalem. David knew no kingdom is secure without the presence of its true king. David called his elders. They met under the open skies near the citadel. Sunlight spilled onto the circle of warriors, priests, and tribal leaders. These were men who had walked through war, rebellion, and exile, but now they were witnessing the beginning of a new era. "We must bring the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord to us," David said, his voice strong and clear. "We did not inquire of it during the reign of Saul, but we shall not repeat that silence." The murmurs of agreement turned into a chorus of approval. It was a righteous plan. "And we will do it with rejoicing," David added. "Let all Israel come with us. Let music rise. Let the name of the Lord be lifted." But among the crowd stood a quiet man whose eyes lingered not on the king, but on the earth. Uzzah, son of Abinadab, the keeper of the ark. He had grown up near it, his childhood shadow often cast upon the ancient gold-covered box. His hands had helped dust it, though he had never touched it. He revered it, feared it, but it was also part of his life, ordinary and extraordinary all at once. Now he would accompany it, protect it, and unknowingly walk toward destiny. Preparations began at once. Craftsmen shaped a new cart, of cedar wood and iron-bound wheels. It was sturdy, beautiful, fitting for something divine. Oxen were chosen for their strength and grace. Musicians practiced with lyres, harps, tambourines, and trumpets. But amidst the celebration, an ancient law remained forgotten. The ark was never meant to be transported by cart. It was holy, sacred, set apart. It was to be carried by the Levites, on their shoulders, using poles that slid through rings on its sides. For to touch it was to tread upon the threshold of the eternal. Yet the memory of that law was buried beneath good intentions and eager celebration. David did not remember, nor did the priests remind him. The cart gleamed. The procession was ready, and Uzzah stood beside his brother Ahio, guiding the oxen. Both men walked with pride and reverence, oblivious to the spiritual fault line beneath their feet. The sun rose higher, casting golden light upon the hills. The ark was lifted onto the new cart, and the people gathered in multitudes. Trumpets blared. Songs soared. David danced at the front, leaping and twirling in joy, his robe flowing with every beat. The earth seemed to pulse with praise. From villages, men and women emerged, their hands raised, their hearts stirred. It was a national revival, a king and his people walking in harmony with God. Yet no one noticed the ark's silence. It gave no sign of approval, no fire, no voice, no cloud, only stillness. And still it rolled on, closer to destiny, closer to a place called Nacon's threshing floor, where grain was separated from chaff, and truth was tested. To the untrained eye, the Ark of the Covenant was merely a chest, a box of gold, beautiful but ordinary. Yet its surface shimmered with mystery even in daylight. 2 cherubim knelt on its lid, their wings outstretched toward each other, forming an invisible throne. Between them, in that sacred air, hovered the presence of the living God, the Shekinah glory, unseen but ever present. The ark was not magic, it was not a weapon, it was not to be used, it was to be honored. Within it were fragments of Israel's divine history, the stone tablets of the covenant, Aaron's budding staff, and a golden pot of manna, reminders of God's promises, judgments, and provision. To approach the ark carelessly was to forget the fire that once consumed Nadab and Abihu for offering unauthorized incense. To mishandle it was to ignore the plagues that ravaged Philistine cities when they captured it in arrogance. The ark was a paradox. It brought blessing or destruction, depending on the posture of the heart that approached it. And on that joyful day, with music and dancing, with oxen clopping and people shouting, the sacred was being carried like cargo. Uzzah walked with practiced calm beside the ark, the reins of the oxen in his hand. His brother Ahio led from the front, clearing the path, guiding the animals through winding roads. Villagers clapped and sang as they passed, hands reaching toward the ark, mouths lifting songs of celebration. But inside Uzzah churned a quiet tension. He had always respected the ark. He remembered the stories his father told him, of how men trembled in its presence, of the day it was brought to their home after the Philistines returned it on a cart. That same cart. Wasn't that how the Philistines had sent it back? And now Israel imitated them. He didn't speak the thought aloud. It wasn't his place. He was not a priest, not a prophet, just a son of Abinadab, an ordinary man who had grown up in the shadow of the extraordinary. Yet, as the wheels creaked and the cart wobbled with each stone in the path, his hand hovered close, just in case. At the front of the procession, David danced. His movements were raw and unfiltered, unkingly and sincere. He danced not for the people but for the Lord, a celebration of the reunion between heaven and earth. His eyes were closed at times, lost in praise. His soul soared above the crowd. He felt right. He felt holy. He felt the pleasure of the Lord. But still, the ark did not respond. No thunder, no cloud, no whisper. He remembered the stories of Moses, of how the glory filled the tabernacle like fire and smoke. He remembered how Joshua was told to stand far back, to let the ark go ahead. But today, nothing. The music covered the silence, until the threshing floor. The sun stood high when the procession reached the place known as Nacon's threshing floor. It was a wide, flat space carved into the hilltop where oxen had once dragged heavy sledges over piles of harvested grain. There the wheat was crushed and separated from its husk, the valuable from the worthless. The symbolism was unseen, but heaven noticed. The oxen stumbled, the cart shook, the ark tilted, and Uzzah, seeing the holy artifact of God's presence about to fall, did what any man of good heart might do. He reached out. His fingers touched the wood, then the gold, then nothing. Long before the silence, before the horror, before the sudden hand of judgment, there had been joy. The ark's return was not just a logistical event, it was a national resurrection. Israel had not seen a day like this in generations. Families poured out from the cities and villages with their children, waving branches and singing psalms passed down through the mouths of grandfathers. Daughters danced with tambourines. Sons wore new linen robes, mimicking the priest they admired from afar. The sound of harps, lyres, cymbals, and horns merged with the rhythm of feet pounding dusty roads. Sheep scattered as the procession passed. Merchants paused their trading. Mothers whispered to their little ones that is the ark of our God. Everywhere David looked, he saw light, not in the sky, but in the eyes of his people. The pain of Saul's reign, the long night of civil unrest, the grief of losing the ark to the Philistines, it all felt like a distant memory. Hope, that fragile and sacred thread, had returned. And the man who led it all, the king after God's own heart, was not astride a war horse or guarded by armored men. He was in front, robed in simple linen, dancing like no one watched. He twirled, clapped, shouted psalms, lifted his arms to the sky. With every leap he broke protocol. With every spin he shattered the wall between the palace and the people. Behind him marched a line of priests, their robes immaculate, faces solemn. Though they were not carrying the ark, their presence was meant to echo Moses' time. Some whispered scripture as they walked. Others kept eyes trained on the ark to ensure it did not sway too much. Still, they said nothing of the cart. Some may have remembered the instructions of old. The book of the law had not been lost, only quiet. Reverence was still present, but perhaps dulled by time and routine. Was it possible that zeal had outpaced obedience? No one dared question the king's decision. David was God's chosen. His vision had united the people. His love for the Lord was unquestionable. And yet the ark rolled, silent, sacred, and now perilously placed on wheels of human convenience. Further back, Uzzah and Ahio led the oxen carefully. The animals were strong but restless, feeling the electric tension of the crowd, the music, the vibrations of drums. Uzzah's eyes scanned the horizon. Though he was not singing, his heart hummed. He remembered as a child sitting near the ark, feeling a strange peace flood the house. It had dwelled with them for decades, and nothing terrible had happened. On the contrary, their house had been favored. Now he was tasked with watching over it, escorting it back to the city of kings. Was it pride? No. He would have called it duty. His hand stayed close, not because he did not trust God, but because he wanted to be useful if something went wrong. But what the people did not see, what no eye could detect, was that the ark was not merely a relic. It was the throne of the invisible king. As it rolled through the land, unseen beings watched. Angels hovered in reverence. The earth remembered the footsteps of God in the garden. The rocks recalled the voice that split seas. Even the oxen trembled. The ark was holy because God was near, not symbolically, literally, eternally. And the time was drawing near when that holiness would demand a reckoning. Uzzah the son, Uzzah the servant. Before he was the man who touched the ark, Uzzah was the son of Abinadab. As a boy, he had witnessed the arrival of the Ark of the Covenant to his home. The stories were vivid even now. The cart had come, drawn by lowing cows that had never been yoked. wandering straight from the land of the Philistines to the borders of Israel as if led by an invisible hand. There had been fear then, reverent fear, but also awe. The elders of Israel had dared not move it farther, so it remained placed with honor in Abinadab's house on the hill. Uzzah had grown up with the ark mere feet away, though separated by a veil, by strict instruction, and by trembling tradition. His father had said, "We serve, but we do not touch." And so Uzzah had learned to sweep the floors near it, to bow near it, to never turn his back on it, but never to handle it. The weight of that lesson had never left him. Yet decades passed. The ark became part of the family rhythm. There were no plagues, no thunder, no fire. It simply dwelled, quietly, humbly, untouched. Then one morning came the king's men, speaking of a national procession. The ark was to be moved to Jerusalem, and the king himself would walk in front of it. Uzzah was chosen, alongside his brother Ahio, to guide the cart. It was an honor, a dangerous one. But Uzzah had no fear. He was steady, dutiful, and familiar with the ark's presence. If anyone could walk beside it, it was he. As they set out, he remained vigilant. The oxen were unpredictable, the roads were rough, and the ark, though beautiful and seemingly still, commanded a weight that no man could truly understand. As they approached Nacon's threshing floor, the atmosphere changed. Perhaps the ground grew uneven. Perhaps the oxen grew nervous, sensing what no human could. One ox lifted a hoof to avoid a stone, stumbled and jerked sideways. The cart shuddered, the ark tilted. Gasps broke from the crowd. The music hiccuped, dust rose. And Uzzah acted. Instinctively, protectively, without thought. His hand shot up, steadying the ark, keeping it from crashing to the earth. And in that moment, less than a breath, he crossed an eternal line. It wasn't lightning, it wasn't wind, it wasn't thunder, it was God. A flash, unseen by most but felt by all, ripped through the air. Not fire from the heavens, but something more ancient, more righteous, something that could only be described as the wrath of holiness. Uzzah died instantly. There was no scream, no struggle. His body dropped beside the cart, motionless, lifeless. The ark did not fall. It hovered still on the cart, untouched by chaos, untouched by man. And for the first time that day, silence swallowed the joy. People stopped dancing. Musicians dropped their instruments. Children clutched their mothers' robes. The oxen stood still. David froze. The king who danced before God now stood staring at the lifeless body of a man he had trusted, a man who had served the ark faithfully for years. And yet here he was, struck down in the moment he tried to protect what was holy. It made no sense. And yet, it did. David's joy turned to trembling. His praise turned to questions. What had they done wrong? What had he done wrong? He walked slowly to the body of Uzzah, laid a trembling hand on his shoulder, but there was no breath left. The Ark of the Covenant sat in silence, and God had spoken, not with words, but with judgment. The tambourines lay silent on the ground. Trumpets once lifted high now hung limp in the hands of stunned players. The dancers froze in their tracks, eyes fixed on the unmoving form of Uzzah, who just seconds before had been walking upright, faithful and alert. The once boisterous road was cloaked in a silence so thick it pressed upon the chest. It was a silence of divine interruption. David stood in it. As king, he had witnessed death on battlefields, in Saul's court, even in his own household. But this death was different. It was holy, it was terrifying, it was beyond comprehension. And it had not come from man, it had come from God. David's heart twisted with a strange cocktail of emotions, sorrow, confusion, and yes, anger. How could God strike down a man who was only trying to help, Had Uzzah not grown up near the ark? Had he not walked beside it for years with reverence? Had his instincts not been right? David clenched his fists, blinking at the motionless body of the man he had trusted with this sacred task. Scripture would later say, David was angry because the Lord's wrath had broken out against Uzzah. But beneath that anger boiled fear, because David now realized what he had forgotten in his excitement to bring glory back to Israel. God is not to be handled casually. The ark was not to be touched, not even with good intentions. David had led a celebration. He had united the people, but he had failed to obey the holy instructions that governed the ark's movement. In zeal, he had imitated the ways of the Philistines, using a cart, not consecrated shoulders, and Uzzah had paid the price. The people waited for David to speak, to lead, but the king, once bold and bursting with joy, now hesitated. His voice when it came was a whisper. How can the ark of the Lord ever come to me? His words were not rhetorical. They were raw, wounded, honest. In that moment, David understood that the God he loved was not a pet, not a tool, not a symbol to parade before the people. The God he worshipped was the living God, holy, consuming, pure, and terrifying in righteousness. He had welcomed the ark with dancing, but now he would not take one step closer to it. Priests rushed forward to gather Uzzah's body. They did so with trembling hands, as if afraid that even touching the dead man might invoke judgment. The crowd began to whisper. Some cried, some turned away, others knelt where they stood, faces in the dirt. The joy of the day had shattered on the threshing floor, just as wheat is crushed and separated from its husk. God had separated the sacred from the profane, the holy from the common, the true worship from thoughtless celebration. David looked once more at the ark. It had not moved. It did not glow. It did not speak. But its presence now loomed heavy, heavier than 1,000 armies. He could not take it into Jerusalem. Not like this. Not with joy stained in blood. He turned to his men. "Take it to the house of Obed-Edom," he said, his voice hollow. "Let it remain there, until the Lord shows us mercy." And with that, the procession ended. The people dispersed in silence, and the Ark of the Covenant was carried not to the palace, not to the tabernacle, but to a man's home. Because the king, the priests, the people, all had been reminded, God is not to be managed, he is to be feared. They walked back differently. The laughter was gone. The rhythm of feet was slower, unsure. Instruments that had filled the valleys with praise now bumped quietly against the backs of their owners as they trudged homeward, heads down, mouths closed. No one dared speak the name Uzzah too loudly. It felt sacred now, like a forbidden name carved into stone. He had touched the holy, and the holy had struck back. Children clung to their mothers, confused by the shift in mood. Elders shook their heads slowly, remembering other days when holiness had cut through disobedience like a sword. Even the sun seemed dimmer, its brilliance dulled by the weight of the unseen. And somewhere between confusion and reverence, the people began to whisper, "Who can stand before the Lord, this holy God?" David did not return to his palace that night. He stopped at the outskirts of the city, refusing the comfort of royal walls or the praise of those too far away to understand what had happened. Wrapped in his cloak, he sat in the shadows near the fire, eyes staring into the flames that danced like judgment before him. His mind would not let go of the image, Uzzah, faithful, good-hearted, strong, falling with a touch. His soul churned with regret. Had he failed? Had his joy outpaced wisdom? Had he confused enthusiasm with obedience? He was not angry anymore. He was terrified. This was the God who had called him from shepherding sheep, the same God who had anointed him, who had delivered him from Goliath, who had preserved him through Saul's rage. But this same God had now drawn a hard line, and David had stepped over it, not with evil intentions, but with carelessness. He pulled a scroll from the leather pouch beside him, a worn piece of parchment bearing the instructions of Moses, laws concerning the ark, the Levites, the handling of the sacred. And there, written plainly, "They must not touch the holy things or they will die." Numbers 4:15. David wept. In homes across Israel, the people talked in hushed tones. The story had spread like fire through dry grass. They were singing, one said. There was dancing, another whispered. And then God struck him. Some feared the ark itself, thinking it cursed. Others blamed David for the improper procession. A few began to fast, repenting for their part, even if they hadn't known what was wrong. Yet deep within them all, an ancient truth was rekindled. God is holy, not in theory, not in song, in reality, and holiness demands reverence. Meanwhile, a quiet man named Obed-Edom the Gittite stood at the entrance of his house, watching as the ark of God approached, carried carefully this time, as if every breath around it might ignite fire. David stood beside it, his expression solemn. "The ark must rest here," he said. Obed-Edom looked from the ark to his children inside. His wife held a child close, fearful. He did not answer immediately. The stories had reached him too. But he saw something in David's face. A deep sorrow, yes, but also a holy fear, he understood. Obed-Edom bowed and stepped aside. "Let the presence of the Lord dwell here," he said softly. "We will honor him." And so, the ark entered the home of a common man, its gold reflecting the flickering light of oil lamps, its holiness resting quietly beside the daily rhythms of a family learning what it meant to live with God. The ark entered the modest home of Obed-Edom not with fanfare, but with fear. His household stood still as the sacred chest was carried into the largest room and placed gently upon a platform draped in fine linen. Obed-Edom dismissed unnecessary servants. He cleared the space. He instructed his children not to run near it, not to raise their voices near it, not to even speak of it lightly. He closed the doors. And for a long time the house was quiet. He expected judgment. He expected the weight of the ark to bring hardship, maybe even death. After all, hadn't they just buried Uzzah? But in the nights that followed, something strange happened. The oil jar never ran dry. The wheat in the granary, which had once been modest, grew inexplicably in abundance. The livestock gave birth without complication. The soil bore fruit, even in corners that had long been fallow. Obed-Edom's children, once frail from the heat of summer, grew strong and radiant. Peace settled over the house, not as a feeling, but as a presence. Neighbors noticed, whispers spread. Even the servants, once cautious and afraid, now worked near the ark with quiet reverence, bowing as they passed the room. The home did not merely survive the ark's presence. It thrived under it. And day after day, Obed-Edom would kneel near the doorpost of the room where it rested, pressing his forehead to the ground, whispering, "You are holy, O Lord, and we are dust. Yet you have been merciful." Back in Jerusalem, David still wrestled with the memory of Uzzah. He had not dared return to the ark. He had not resumed the celebration. He kept to his scrolls and his psalms, fasting more than usual, praying long into the night. Then came the word. A messenger arrived, breathless, eyes wide. "My lord, Obed-Edom's household, is blessed." David turned slowly. "Blessed? Yes, my king. Since the ark entered his house, his crops have tripled, his children are well, his household glows with joy. The Lord's hand is with him." David stared into the distance, and something shifted in his chest. A spark. The same God who had struck down Uzzah had favored Obed-Edom, same ark, same presence. Different posture. David realized then what had gone wrong. It was not the celebration that God rejected. It was the disobedience, the absence of reverence, the careless handling of the holy. He had treated the ark like an artifact, a banner to parade, not a throne to approach with trembling and awe, but Obed-Edom. He had made room for God, not with gold or song, but with quiet honor and daily surrender. David stood. He called for the priests. "We will bring the ark," he said, "but this time we will do it right." Before David moved a single step toward the ark again, he called the priests, the sons of Levi, the keepers of the law, the guardians of what was sacred. This time, there would be no carts, no shortcuts, no presumptions. The law was consulted, scrolls were opened, dust was blown from the ancient commands. The ark of God must be carried by the Levites, David declared before the gathered assembly, for that is how the Lord commanded in the days of Moses. The priests and Levites consecrated themselves, fasting, praying, cleansing body and spirit. They bathed in silence, robed in white linen, and walked barefoot across holy ground, aware now that to stand in God's presence was not performance, it was survival. David himself dressed not as a king but as a worshiper, a simple linen ephod, casting aside his crown, laying down his title. He did not want to enter God's presence as a ruler. He wanted to enter as a servant. Word spread quickly, the ark was coming. Not just to the city, but to the heart of it. This time the people did not rush the roads with reckless praise. They came in hushed waves, singing songs of awe and expectation. The Levites, now reverent and alert, lifted the ark, not with hands on gold, but by sliding poles through its rings, just as commanded. The sacred box did not creak or falter. It was lifted gently, steadily, as if heaven itself steadied their steps. With each movement, the ground beneath them seemed to hum. David had learned something else, something ancient and costly. As soon as the bearers took 6 steps, he stopped them. Then he offered a sacrifice, oxen and fattened sheep, right there on the road. Not once, but again and again. Every few paces they paused to worship through blood, a reminder that access to holiness always came at a cost. The smell of smoke and incense mingled with songs. Tears flowed freely from the people. Children knelt beside their fathers. Elders raised their hands to the sky. Some remembered Uzzah and wept with both sorrow and clarity. God's presence was returning, on his terms, and David danced again, not out of unguarded excitement this time, but with a deeper fire. It was not the leaping of a man giddy with success, but the trembling joy of a soul overwhelmed by mercy. He twirled and shouted praises, not for the crowd, but for the God who did not abandon them. This time the ark was not a trophy, it was a throne. This time the procession was not a celebration of culture. It was a coronation of the Holy One. The gates of Jerusalem opened wide, and the crowd that had once been silenced by fear now roared with reverent joy. Trumpets sounded, not to entertain but to declare. Psalmists sang, not to perform but to worship. Lift up your heads, O gates, be lifted up, you ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in. And with slow, sacred steps, the Ark of the Covenant entered the city. The priests placed it inside the tent David had prepared. No one touched it, no one presumed, but everyone worshipped. It was not the return of an object. It was the return of God's presence to the heart of his people. Before the ark could take even one step closer to Jerusalem, David refused to repeat the past. The pain of Uzzah's death was still fresh in his soul, but clarity had come like lightning through clouded joy. This time, he would honor God. The ark had come home. Drums thundered across the hilltops. Horns pierced the skies. Priests wept as they laid the ark in its place, beneath the tent David had prepared in the city of God. And in the center of the storm of praise, David danced. He danced like no one was watching, though everyone was. He danced not as a king, but as a servant, unashamed and unruly in his joy. His linen ephod flowed as he spun in wild abandon, every movement pouring out gratitude and reverence. This was not the man who had mourned beside Uzzah's lifeless body. This was a man forgiven, awakened, and in full surrender. He had learned what it meant to walk in the fire of God's holiness, and now, in the light of God's mercy, he worshipped with every breath. But not all were pleased. High above the celebration, hidden behind a window in the palace, Michal, daughter of Saul and David's first wife, watched the scene unfold with tightened lips and narrowing eyes. To her, royalty had rules. Kings were meant to hold dignity like a sword, firm, proud, untouchable. But David, he was leaping, shouting, twisting, his voice cracked. His garments clung to him with sweat. His face, radiant with joy, looked nothing like a monarch and everything like a madman. She didn't see a worshiper. She saw shame. When the last trumpet quieted and the final offering of praise was lifted, David returned to bless his household. His heart was still soaring, spirit ablaze with the nearness of God's presence. But Michal stood waiting. Her words were sharp, laced with sarcasm and pride. "How the king of Israel distinguished himself today," she said, stepping forward, going around half-dressed in front of the slave girls, like a fool. Her disdain was not just for the dancing, it was for the humility. David's eyes flared, not with anger, but with truth. "It was before the Lord," he replied, voice steady, "who chose me rather than your father. I will become even more undignified than this. I will be humiliated in my own eyes, if it means worshiping him." He was not dancing for her. He was not dancing for the people. He danced for the one who struck down Uzzah and yet allowed the ark to dwell in a man's home. The one who judged rightly and blessed freely. The one who called a shepherd and crowned a worshiper. Michal turned away, her heart hardened by pride. Scripture would say that she remained barren the rest of her days, not as punishment from David, but as a tragic contrast. A woman who mocked worship, while her husband's legacy became that of a man after God's own heart. David had failed. He had feared. He had learned. But in the end, he danced in spirit. Because he knew. Reverence was not silence. Holiness was not stiffness. And worship was never about appearance. It was always about the heart. The Ark of the Covenant rested now in the heart of Jerusalem, not just as a national treasure or a sacred symbol, but as a testimony. It had not arrived by spectacle, but by fire, not on wheels, but on shoulders, not through ceremony, but through sacrifice. And every man, woman, and child in Israel now understood one truth with piercing clarity. God is not to be carried by the strength of man, nor honored by the standards of the world. He is holy, utterly holy. Three figures now stood etched into the soul of the nation. Uzzah, whose hand reached out of duty and was struck by righteousness. His grave became a monument not of failure but of forgotten reverence, a holy warning for generations to come. Obed-Edom, whose home had welcomed the ark with trembling faith and was saturated with blessing. His life reminded Israel that the presence of God is both dangerous and desirable. David, the man after God's own heart, who had danced twice, first in celebration, then in humility, who had learned through pain how to approach the sacred, who did not cling to his crown, but bowed in spirit before the invisible king. The story of Uzzah is not one of cruelty, it is one of clarity. God was never a passive presence. He was not an accessory to Israel's success or a trophy of their return to power. He was, and is, the consuming fire who speaks from mountains and splits seas, the one who cannot be controlled, managed, or maneuvered, but who draws near to the humble, the broken, and the reverent. He is both thunder and whisper, both justice and mercy, both lion and lamb. Thousands of years later, the ark is gone from sight, but its message remains. In a world that celebrates speed, spectacle, and shortcuts, the story of Uzzah reminds us that good intentions are not substitutes for obedience, that the sacred cannot be rushed, that God's presence must be pursued on His terms, not ours. It reminds leaders and followers alike to approach with awe, to worship with truth, and to never forget that the God who dwells among us is holy. And yet, in all His power and purity, this same God made a way for His people, not through the ark alone, but ultimately through Christ, who tore the veil and invited us into the holy place not as outsiders but as children. Uzzah died because the law was unbroken and holiness uncompromised, but Jesus died to satisfy that law, and now, through Him, we are invited to carry His presence not in boxes, but in our hearts. And still the command remains, "Be holy, for I am holy," because God is still God, still fire, still mercy, still King. The ark reached Jerusalem, but it did not come on wheels. It came on shoulders. It did not arrive through excitement. It arrived through obedience. And in its wake, the nation remembered what it had forgotten, that God is not a symbol. He is not a decoration for our dreams. He is the living, present, holy King. Uzzah's death was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of a rediscovery, of awe, of fear, of worship. David learned to dance again, but this time barefoot and broken, in step with the Spirit. And we too are invited to carry the presence of God, but not casually, not carelessly, only with the trembling joy of those who know He is with us, and He is holy. If this story spoke to you, I invite you to subscribe so you don't miss what God might whisper next. This is Untold Bible Stories, and the journey is just beginning.